Hello, everybody. This is Gaylord DeWald, and you are listening to the Trialogues podcast. And I'm coming to you from the Howard Space Center here in Burlington, Vermont. And I have with me two fantastic friends of mine, Rob Hahn and Matthew Shadbolt. And so, hey, guys, why don't you say hello so people can get used to everybody's awesome voices.
Hey, this is Rob Hahn. I'm coming to you from a underground bunker down here in Houston, Texas, where I am stockpiling spam and emergency water supplies because, you know, my friends back out east apparently went through a little weather situation which disrupted lots of things, not the least, the least of which is probably Trialogues. So with that, Matthew, I'm so glad to hear you guys are okay. What's up?
Yeah, hey guys. I come to you from post-Sandy Manhattan here. I'm here at Corcoran on the east side in Manhattan, and the city's getting back to normal here. I live just outside of the city, and we were 11 days without power after a pretty brutal hurricane came through our area. So, we were one of the early ones in comparison in terms of getting power back and being able to recover. It's very, very nasty for some folks here, but we're all safe and things are very slowly getting back to normal here. Still a lot of cleanup going on here, especially downtown. Poor Battery Park City is in pretty bad shape here.
Oh, still. Well, I'm glad to hear you're okay. But I am curious about one thing. What's it like to live without power for 11 days?
Well, there were moments that felt sort of like the end of The Shining because it started to get very, very cold, and things like you put like a premium on really weird things, like the cell phone battery life becomes a very, very valuable commodity. And, we were going out to our car to charge our phones. And it's like it makes you reassess sort of the priorities in your life in very odd ways because it started to get dark at about 5 o'clock. And, without any lights or heat, it sort of sets you back about 150 years in terms of how it actually feels. But, you do a lot of reading. You do a lot of enforced unplugging, which is... something, it's a topic that I'm very close to, as regular listeners and readers of my articles will know. But it's sort of like a very strange thing. You definitely get closer with your neighbors, that's for sure, in terms of looking after each other. But, the sort of weird things that we had to go through, like getting in line, a mile away from the gas station to go get gas to put in your car or to power your generator. It's a very surreal experience, very surreal indeed.
What was, of all the things that, you changed over that period of time, was there anything that you stopped doing that you realized you really didn't need to do anymore? Oh, geez, I've changed my behavior in some way, and now, and then you forgot to pick it up again, like a habit or anything like that?
Yeah, I honestly, this might not be a surprise, but I honestly just stopped using Facebook. I think I went through maybe like a couple days where I was like, I really just want to share with people what I'm doing and that we're okay and things are, moving along here. But the impulse to actually, be online started to fade quite quickly after about the fourth or fifth day, which is it was a very nice feeling, actually, and it's something that's actually stuck. Being able to actually sit and read and focus and not think about the internet at all was very surreal, but very positive, and something that I'm trying to maintain here. So that's a nice thing that I saw change, and noticeably, actually, when my family and I watch TV, we actually don't reach for the iPad or the iPhone now when we're watching TV. I know one of our recent episodes, we were talking about all the second screen stuff. That definitely seemed to go away as a result of the storm, which is sort of unusual. But there's still no trains here for me to even get to work, so I'm driving to work at the moment, which is very unusual for me. Me and 100,000 other people trying to get through the Lincoln Tunnel every morning at about 8 o'clock. So, yeah, it's pretty nasty out on the roads, but huge devastation in terms of trees down and damage to the New Jersey Transit and the Long Island Railroad here. It's still a real mess, probably about 3 weeks later here.
Well, let's hope, you guys get out of the real serious issue. I mean, I was just reading some news reports about, Coney Island and how we still have people in some dire need. So, I really hope that somehow, that they figure that stuff out and, have life get back to normal, because winter is really, right on top of you guys. And, having lived in New York for so long, I can't even imagine. But listen, we don't want to spend the rest of this podcast kind of worrying about that, because there are plenty of other places that do. We do want life to go back to normal. And normally we talk about esoteric, high-minded things about technology, real estate, and whatnot. And I know from the pre-show, when we were sort of talking about it, there is something kind of really intriguing for us to talk about. And Gaylor, I think you're the one who sort of really saw the opportunity. Start us off.
Yeah. So here's the thought, and it's just a thought. I don't have like a ton of data to frame this, but here's the thinking, and it goes like this. So there are lots of apps and bits of technology out there that are designed and promoted to help agents do more creative content making. So video editing apps and updating your Facebook page apps and stuff for you mostly, I guess, focus on video and images, not so much on text, but all of these things around that, with the idea that it can help agents, real estate agents, either make more creative content or make better creative content, or somehow, differentiate themselves by using a particular app or whatever, And there's a part of me that wonders, whether that's helpful or not. In terms of, does it really make a lot of sense for an agent to spend a lot of time focusing on this kind of creative production? Does it matter to someone looking to list their house or someone looking for help buying a house? Does it matter to them whether their real estate agent is good at making videos or not? And from a marketing standpoint, it makes sense to me. Having good content attracts visitors to websites online. It gives you something to promote in different channels. But there's also a part of me that wonders whether it's realistic or beneficial to be putting that burden on the agent themselves. Because not everybody is a photographer, and not everybody is a movie maker, or editor. Some people are. I know, Ira Serkis takes awesome photos. Inez takes awesome photos. Teresa Boardman takes awesome photos. But not everybody are those kinds of people or have that kind of interest. And there's a part of me that wonders whether there's, an entire segment of the vendor industry out there promoting the idea that everyone needs to be creative, and when maybe that's not helpful or not. And what I don't have is the consumer data on this, which I wish that the NAR research team would, when they're doing their, consumer research, would ask, hey, do you expect your agent to be excellent at making videos?
Well, I know that they do the buyer and seller, surveys every year. And I don't know that they've ever asked that specific question, Gaylor. In fact, I'm reasonably sure that they never have. But we do know that, the number one reason why, people choose to work with a realtor is trust. So I do think that it's interesting. The question, if I understand it correctly, it kind of comes down to how important is creativity, right, as a trait that will attract customers?
Right. Well, I think in that regard, I think a strong argument can be made for that. Well, but what I'm wondering is whether it's the agent that needs to be doing that or not.
Yeah, there's no argument that creative differentiation is of enormous value, especially if you're a seller, I think. But I think, to Gaylord's earlier point, like what is the expectation on the part of the consumer that creativity is to be performed by the agent? And is it more a conversation of strategic distribution of those creative elements? Like, not only will we make sure that we have awesome photos of the listing, but we'll also make sure that they run in, hundreds of thousands of different places online that are going to, make sure that we're not only looking the best, but we are distributed in the most widest sense as well. And is this an expectation on the customer's part of the agent, for the agents, or is this actually something, perhaps more of an expectation on the part of, vendors, having conversations about agents about, enabling them to be able to do things that, have the perceived differentiation in the mind of the consumer, whether that's backed by data or not. And that's the interesting thing, is that there isn't actually any data on something like this. It's really a little bit hypothetical here.
Right. No, there is no actual data. There's some anecdotal evidence.
Right.
Which is, I think, the best we can do for now. So I guess the way I would try to frame this would be, is this increased creativity free, or does it come at a cost? So, in other words, here's how I look at it. Depends. I guess it depends a little bit on how survey questions are formulated. If you were to ask somebody, should your agent take great, wonderful videos of your listing, I think the answer would be yes. Right? I mean, who would say no? I don't need my agent to do that, right?
Yeah, somebody should.
It's whether it should be the agent or not, Rob. That's really the question. There's no question that everybody should have, amazing photos of their listing, whatever the state of the listing.
And that should be table staked.
Yeah, that's sort of the
right.
Whether the expectation is on the agent to actually perform that service.
But I think what I'm also wondering is, we're saying it's just table stakes. I don't know that that's true, in the sense that I don't know that consumers have ever been posed with a question, something along the lines of, would you rather have this or that? Right? In other words, assigning some sort of cost to it. And, the nature of how, real estate works is, consumers are totally insensitive to marketing cost involved with anything like this, right? An agent goes and hires a professional photographer to go take, wonderful photographs of the listing. There's a cost associated with it, but the agent eats it. I mean, that's part of the bargain, that they spend the money on marketing costs, and then they recoup it on a very significant commission on the sale of the house. I don't know that we've seen any – I don't even know of any anecdotal evidence that suggests that if the consumers are told, we will do wonderful videos of your house, but I'm going to charge you $2,000 for the video work, whether they say, yeah, go ahead and do that or not. Right? So I'm agreeing with you guys that there's no data on this right now. Right?
That's a great way to think about it, Rob. Because I think you're right. Like, people say, "Oh, do you want this? Yes or no?" The answer is always going to be yes, right? People sit down with the bullet list of these are the things we would like to do, and people say yes. But if you said, even if it wasn't money, we're going to either shoot an awesome video of your house, or we're going to do photos, or we're going to shoot an awesome video of your house, or we're going to do a social media, like making it so that they have to choose other than yes, no. Because if it's yes, no, they're just going to say yes to everything. So we don't know whether they value it or how they value it.
Right.
You could design a really questionnaire at this point from that,
But having said that, I mean, so I almost think of it in reverse. I almost think of it in terms of, like, I go to all the Here at Direct events, and I think about the complaints that consumers will make, right, what they'll complain about. And I've only heard complaints about things like photo or video or lack of good copywriting like once or twice. What I have heard a ton of complaints about is they don't communicate with me. So I almost wonder when we say, creativity and great photographs and all this is just table stakes. I'm not entirely sure that that's true. If we go based on the anecdotal evidence of what are consumers actually complaining about, they're not complaining that you only took 14 photos and it wasn't with, a Nikon, camera. It's more like they're complaining that you're keeping me in the dark, you're not returning my phone calls fast enough, right? So in a real sense, I guess I wonder if you are an agent, and I know this is a slightly different take than what you guys are asking, like who should do this work? It almost feels like to me that before an agent should worry at all about, creative work and photography and wonderful video, they should make sure that the communications and trust elements nailed down first. And maybe this is in line with what you're asking, Matthew and Gaylord, in the sense of what you're saying is, if I understand you correctly, it's not necessarily that consumers don't want this stuff. It's not necessarily that agents and brokers should not provide wonderful creative work. The question is, who actually should provide that, wonderful creative work? I think we're in agreement that placing the burden of taking great photography, for example, on the real estate agent is unfair because, let's face it, most real estate agents are not wonderful photographers. If they were, they would be working as wonderful photographers, right? They'd be doing GQ fashion shoots. So then it's almost sort of wondering, is this something that professionals ought to do? Is this something that brokerages ought to do? Is this something that vendors ought to do? And leaving the agents free to do what they're supposed to do, the table stakes of communication and engendering trust and advising their clients. Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
It is to some extent, Rob. I mean, that's definitely, the logistics of who does the work is definitely part of this conversation. The other side of it, which is really more the genesis of this, is the contention that the advice perpetuated amongst the industry towards agents, that they are now empowered through let's call it like the low-hanging fruit of the app world, to be producers, and let's call that, photographers, videographers, anything that you could sort of create surrounding, the marketing materials of your listing with your iPhone or your iPad, that ultimately gets distributed, is now of almost zero cost or very, very minimal cost in opposition to hiring professionals. Let's call it like that. Like the ability to download an app and do it yourself versus, let's say, hiring a production crew for, thousands of dollars a day to actually produce and edit a glossier looking clip. So, as the technology comes down in price and increases in accessibility, is the expectation being placed on the agent that because they can do more, they should be doing more? That's really the question as I see it, I think. Then it becomes, if it's not the agent, who is it that's supposed to be doing it? Is it outsourced to a production crew? Is it the role of the brokerage? Who pays for it? That kind of stuff. Because, empowering agents at scale by brokerages, there's different ways that you could cut that in terms of either putting tools in the agent's hands and still getting the agents to feel empowered and do it themselves, or, providing services that actually go around the agents that free them of actually having to make anything themselves in favor of a brokerage providing that service to its agents as a value add. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really the piece of it, right? There's whose responsibility is it to do it, and when I look at it from the technology side of it, like the idea of enabling and empowering an agent, at kind of first blush, I think that's a great idea. Give people tools so that they can do their job better. But the question is, A, is it the agent's job? And B, there's that part of empowering the customer where it's really about outsourcing the labor to your customer in a way. And so I think about brokerage, and in many cases, for better or for worse, it seems like the customer of brokerage is agents. And we've kind of talked about that here before. And so if they're kind of it seems, from a production capability standpoint, I feel that a broker would be better off, is better positioned to handle that kind of thing, where it's like, oh, well, once we have a listing, we have a producer that goes in and handles it, and there are different, the kind of like smaller indie brokers that are going after that kind of market, and Darren bought the truck of the video production truck, up at M Realty is probably a good example of that. But then there's also so that's like one thing, that logistics thing. Should it be the broker's responsibility? Should it be the agent's responsibility? The other side of it too is just whether the whole idea of handing these creative tools off to agents with the idea of this allowing people to create a strategic distinction between them and everyone else. I wonder whether there's kind of a falsehood in that, honestly, where it's like, okay, well, if we all get Instagram and we all start taking pictures with Instagram filters, then suddenly we're going to be more creative. We just flip that creative filter on there. But the reality is everybody's got a copy of Instagram. And so it doesn't differentiate anything. By virtue of everyone using the same kinds of tools, it eliminates differentiation, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, as the barrier to entry lowers, the differentiation lowers as well. I mean, there's a direct correlation between those two things.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering though is I know what you guys are getting at. I think I agree to the extent that the more powerful the tool, less of a differentiator that can be. But I think about the fact that we've had something like Photoshop, or Adobe Illustrator for 20 years now. And, I'm pretty sure that a talented graphic designer using the exact same tool is going to just create better stuff than I can. And I could have access to the exact same tool. I suppose a part of it is because, tools like Photoshop or Illustrator or, or Final Cut Pro or any of these things, they're hard to use. They're really more intended for professional usage versus Instagram or, one of these sort of marketing apps that do everything for you. But I guess I still feel like the issue is that you can't get creativity out of a box no matter what. So all you're going to end up getting is, undifferentiated sameness, since anyone can go and buy that tool, right? Isn't that, there's sort of, in other words, it's kind of, you guys are absolutely right, but at the same time, it's also not, in the sense that, creativity is creativity, and a tool can't give you that, right?
Yeah, right. Like downloading an app isn't going to turn you into a music video producer.
Right, exactly.
It's not going to give you a sense of style. It's not going to give you any of those things. It's going to give you the ability to make something which points perhaps in the direction of talented filmmaker. But it's not going to, which isn't to say that people can't learn and use the tools and get better and all of that kind of stuff. But buying the tool does not make you a better creative person. Matthew, what do you think about that?
Well, the question in my head is, does the customer care about something like that?
Right.
If I'm an agent and I'm up against another agent for an exclusive or something like that, and I say to them, well, I'll make sure that this gets distributed to my 1,000 followers on Instagram, versus versus the other agent that's in the room that doesn't know what Instagram is. Is there more value to that in the mind of the customer? And you could probably answer that there would be. So, at some point, it actually becomes not about that subjective argument about, is it creative or not? It actually becomes about a question of perceived value from the customer, I think. And it's sort of like a really, really interesting dichotomy, I think, because I'm right there with you, Rob. I mean, Photoshop in particular, the barrier to entry for Photoshop has definitely lowered over the years, but it's still a fairly complicated tool to use in the face of something like an Instagram or, some other photo editing, video production thing that you can do on your smartphone. So, I think, an agent that goes in and says, I will create video tours for you. In many ways, I'm not sure if that particular client is going to evaluate their creativity in the face of just having it, versus not having it. To your earlier point about the list about whether they want it or not, if they're always going to say yes, does the actual quality of that product come into play in the mind of the customer? I think for some it may, but for most it might not. I mean, what do you think, Rob?
Well, this whole conversation reminds me of a really interesting chat I had with Jonathan Kaufman, at Nest Realty, almost 2 years back now. We were talking about QR codes. Y'all remember QR codes?
Right.
The mania that swept real estate. And at the time, I remember talking to him. He had, their brokers had gone all out and embraced QR codes like crazy. And I asked him, you seeing any business from this? You seeing any leads? And he said, absolutely not. We get absolutely nothing from putting QR codes on our signs. So I said, why do you do it? And the reason is because when he goes on a listing appointment, he can say, hey, Mr. Seller, we use QR codes, right? And that got him more listings. And you know what? It's kind of the shiny bell, thing. It's like the shiny new thing. You have one extra thing than the next guy over, the chance that you're going to win, more often than not. But a huge part of that is directly related to the fact that in the consumer's mind, the agent is a commodity. In other words, they're not able, or they do not really ask detailed questions, about your capabilities, right? Some of the basics, if you will. They all kind of feel like, well, you're all kind of the same. You charge the same price. It's going to cost me 6% either way. So why wouldn't I ask for that one extra thing? If it's a QR code, great. If it's a Instagram, to your followers, then great. I mean, I'm paying the same thing either way. And I think for that reason, a lot of the engagements seem to come down to sort of like personality fit, right? As opposed to I've got this thing and the other guy doesn't. And a lot of it is driven, I do think, by the fact that some of these services, some of these products, some of these, toys are something that you can buy in the marketplace. In other words, let's say I go to a listing appointment and I lose because the other guy has Instagram and I don't. Well, it doesn't take me very much to go get Instagram, It's not like I lost because, that person's got a 20-year track record of selling properties at 10% over list. Well, in that case, there's not very much I can do to compete with that except, get better somehow and prove the same track record. If it's, he won because he has Instagram, well, I'm going to go out and get Instagram. I think that's part of what's leading to this arms race. And what I wonder about, similarly as you do, Matthew, is does there come a point where the consumer sort of sits there and says, everybody has sort of the same thing. Like, I've got an iPhone too. The fact that you've got an iPhone doesn't impress me. What is it that is going to impress me beyond personality? And I don't know that we know the answer to that yet. That makes sense?
It does. Go ahead, Gaylor.
What I'm wondering on it is like the arms race quality of it, right? I think there's sort of, Matthew brought up, I think, an excellent point on it's maybe not so much the fact that you have Instagram, but it's the distribution network that's tied to it that maybe the customer could understand and value more than the Instagram creativity aspect, but just they've got 20,000 followers there. It's still sort of one of these extra bullet lists. Like at some point in the presentation, is the bullet list so long that you've got 25 pages of bullet lists of, well, there are all of these different low-cost, low-barrier things that I could do. Like at what point does it just not even matter at all? And on that side, I think, like Rob, what you're saying there makes a lot of sense. Everyone's charging the same price. Everyone's offering the same set of bullet lists. How does somebody make a decision? Like saying that you can make videos, does that make sense? I don't know. That's the part.
Well, yeah. I mean, it makes sense if everything is the same, right? In other words,
right.
I mean, I think it would apply no matter what. I mean, I've got a guy that does my lawn, and he charges, I don't know, $50. If everybody charged $50, if every lawn care professional charged $50, the guy who's going to promise me, and every time I come, I'm going to leave you a chocolate cookie, he's going to get the business because it all costs me the same. They all do the same level of work. right? But the reality is that's not the way it works in any profession. And the reality is there are better professionals than others. It's just that with real estate, it's really hard to explain what that difference is. I think the arms race is almost inevitable, for now. The question is going to be what happens when everybody has access to everything, right? And in order to differentiate, you really have to go spend a real significant sum of money. Right? To one of your points, you actually have to go start a productions company in order to really compete. What happens then?
Rob, you got a couple of things in there. I mean, I hear you both on the leveling out of the playing field. I mean, what you characterize as the arms race, where there comes a point where everybody has every single tool available to them, and how do you differentiate in the mind of the customer when that happens? I think there's a couple of things. I think one of the things that's very important in the mind of the customer is who works hardest. It isn't, and you sort of make light of characterizing that by the chocolate cookie example. But if the guy that cuts your lawn for $50 does such a fantastic job of taking care of your yard versus the guy that just, runs the mower over it for $50, and provides a higher level of service for the same price, that is perceived of higher value to the customer, and then ultimately that person gets the business. But I'm not sure that it's exclusively a conversation about investment. You say that it comes down to this idea of ultimately spending money on let's say production. I think it also comes down to a conversation about skill level as well, because if you remove price from that conversation, because that in itself is its own arms race, where everybody just tries to outspend each other in order to provide value to the customer. It actually just comes down to skill and expertise, which actually comes back to what we're talking about in terms of agents doing stuff themselves, being able to be creative and productive themselves. So I think, the skill of the person who cuts your yard for $50 comparatively across the marketplace is that point of differentiation. It isn't whether he, invests the time to make you a chocolate cookie, for example. It's about his particular skill level in taking care of you as his client. And I think that there's direct parallels with the real estate conversation there.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I mean, I guess the only thing I was just pointing out is we see it happening in the following manner. With respect to the lawn cutting guy, if that dude is the bodhisattva of lawn cutting, and he's like one with the grass and really knows how to do it so my lawn is beautiful and green, chances are very quickly he'll be able to raise his price, because there are going to be a lot of folks who are like, we need your green thumb, we need your touch on my lawn, and you realize, what, I could charge more than $50. With real estate, I think what ends up happening is those skilled agents, the ones who really do know their stuff, who are experts, who really know and can deliver results, they just get more business. They get a ton of referrals. And this is sort of what we talked about, a couple weeks back, well, not weeks at this point, a couple episodes back, about the importance of service. So I'm 100% on board with you. Everything that I've heard, everything that I've seen today convinces me that what is more important than toys, what's more important than doodads, ultimately is going to be that level of service and that level of expertise. And it doesn't reflect itself in price. It reflects itself in the number of referrals. Right? So ultimately, it's going to work itself out. But what I think ends up happening with a really high level of service, really the highly expert real estate people, is that they end up being able to offer a lot of these tools. They end up being able to offer a lot of even the more expensive stuff, because they have the business to support it. The arms race component that I think we're sort of bemoaning in a certain way is that a lot of vendors, a lot of companies in our space have a relationship backwards. They look at a really high-producing agent and say, well, the reason why they're so high-producing is because they spent $25,000 in the last year on doing videos. Where I think the relationship is the other way around, which is they can afford to spend $25,000 doing videos because they're such high service professionals. They get a ton of referral business.
I think there's a ton of truth to that, Rob.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
there is a massive amount of truth to that. And I don't have the data, but anecdotally, having talked to a lot of people, I don't see a lot of people saying, I'm gonna take out a business loan to do this awesome set of videos. There are people who make that. They definitely commit the resources, but they're not taking out a business loan to do it.
Right. And the thing is, I think the frustrating thing from our standpoint is, if you're not a vendor, if you're not not a consultant of some sort, just trying to, flog some good, I guess I feel like, wouldn't 99% of real estate agents out there be better served by saying, don't go learn Instagram, do not go buy this new app, don't start a blog. Instead, pay a little more attention to your customers. I mean, wouldn't that serve them better? I mean, wouldn't that make them more successful?
I definitely encourage that. I have turned down business from people before for that reason. I mean, well, what are you doing on the CRM side? What are you doing? How are you handling your clients? Because if you're not doing that well, reaching a broader audience and getting them to call you isn't the problem. Where's the bottleneck in the system? And that's what I guess to some degree irritates me when I see apps that and people promoting apps in a way that makes it sound like, oh, download this app and suddenly you will be Ansel Adams, and it's just like you won't be, unless you already are someone who is committed to the craft of fine photography and learning those skills. You're not going to put the Ansel Adams filter on there and suddenly make great work. And then the other side of it is that actually going to improve your business? If you were Ansel Adams in terms of your ability of taking photographs, would that actually land more business? Would it make a difference? And I'm not convinced that it would.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're saying here is that what we're characterizing as creative app advice can only really exist as a stimulant to fuel good customer service. Without customer service, your app stuff is sort of meaningless. And very often what's happening is there's a prevalence of advice that these apps are going to somehow shortcut your way to growing that business. And Rob, I wanted to jump in on something that you said earlier about agents that begin to produce that start to have the means to produce higher quality marketing products. Because I think that's a really, really interesting arms race in terms of what we were speaking about a couple of weeks ago in terms of performing agents versus underperforming agents. And the agents that are performing are actually able to continue to outperform the underperforming ones by producing higher quality marketing materials because their business becomes able to support it. That it becomes able to support outsourcing, essentially, whether that's video production or photography or something. It actually allows them to free up their time to spend more time with clients and produce better materials for them. But I agree with both of you that the bedrock of this is stuff like the CRM stuff and the actual nuts and bolts of the relationship management and the customer service. And I think too often that there's this sort of vendor culture of apps that are unfortunately being perceived as shortcuts to being a top producing agent. And I think that is a myth.
Yeah, you bring up a good, as I continue to digest Rob's statement about people being able to do better marketing materials as a result of doing good business, as opposed to doing good marketing stuff and then generating more business. I wonder whether a part of this, I might flip my position on this importance of creativity stuff. I wonder if some of this is status driven. oh, well, all the good performing agents, all the great agents have these like awesome videos and all this extra stuff. And so in order to appear as if you're an awesome agent, then you need to have a similar layer of, marketing materials. Kind of like, oh, well, the one agent showed up in a crappy car and one agent showed up in a, awesome car. The ownership of the car doesn't make any difference in terms of their ability to do their job. But the idea being that if you have the fancier car, then somehow you're better. But we don't know who's paying a loan on which car or whatever. Like, I wonder whether there's like a status advantage. And the person who's doing the good business and getting in enough money that they can then afford to spend some of it on higher level production stuff, they have an advantage in terms of status, perhaps. And then whether the underperforming agents, they don't have the money to do that, so they end up having to do it themselves, which is where the idea of, if you do this yourself, then you don't have to pay for it, and thereby put on you can look like you're doing more business than you actually are. I don't know. There's just some, and again, I think it still boils down to, does the consumer care or not? Is this just a game of one-upsmanship being played between agents? But I wonder whether there's something to be said in there on the status side of it. I don't know.
I mean, Giller, I think the status thing probably, does play a role because, so much of real estate, it's a sales job, right? And a lot of sales jobs, a lot of marketing things is all about fake it till you make it.
Right.
So I kind of understand that. But, in answer to, again, let's just admit once again that we actually have no data on this, right? All we have are anecdotes, and all I have are like consumer focus groups and things like that. And the thing that convinces me is, almost every single person that we have ever asked at a Here at Direct event, said, they ask a friend or a neighbor for referral. So you could look like you're, the God cat's meow. You could look like God's gift to, real estate in some sort of marketing material, your status or your outlook, and drive around a Rolls Royce. It feels like it doesn't matter, because what people want, what consumers want, is a referral from someone that they trust. And to me, referrals can only be gotten if you do a kick-ass job. Whatever that means, whatever that kick-ass job means, whatever it is you're doing, you have delighted your customer, so therefore your customer is going to recommend you to everybody they know. And it seems like to me like that ultimately is what's going to be important. So, and I think about it, I go, so let's imagine I'm a consumer, and I ask a good friend of mine, I ask my, best friend, hey, I'm thinking about selling my house. Do you know any realtors? If you recommend somebody, they show up, and they're kind of, dressed a little bit funky and, whatever. But this is still the person that, my best friend recommended. Chances I'm going to give that guy a heck of a lot more, of a chance to win my business, if you will. And, the stats, what they're showing is most consumers interview one agent. That's it, right? Most interview one agent. So I don't know. To some extent, I feel like the status thing works in this way in real estate. I don't think that there's a real business justification for status or status symbols. I think it is that people want the status symbols and they justify having it by saying it's for a business purpose. Whereas, again, if you looked at most of the data, if you looked at what seems to be available, if you went and spoke to some of the top producing, agents and realtors, what they say is, I provide awesome service to my customers and they refer me business. And I think that piece of, insight, if it is one, should dictate so much of business practice. So once again, I feel like if, it's better to spend an hour calling all of your past clients than it is to spend an hour, putting together some gorgeous pictorial of biking trails in your town. I just do, right? I could be wrong, and I'm sure there are going to be a bunch of agents who say, I did this pictorial of biking trails in my town and I got, 400 customers from it. Hey, great. What can I tell you? Right? But my sense right now, based on what I know, based on what I've seen, based on what I've read and heard, is actually for 99.9% of agents that are out there, you know what? Spending an hour making extra phone calls is probably going to be better for your business than spending any time on some app or some technology.
All right, I've got some, I guess, to throw in the mix on that one. Because I think where we're at on that then is what role does content play at all, in terms of generating business? Because there's a recent one of the recent NAR surveys where they said like about a third of the realtors, that were surveyed said that they don't get any business at all from their personal website. And, so that third of realtors must be getting business from somewhere else, or else maybe they're not. The problem is with that bit of data, there's not enough context to figure out where they're coming from in terms of whether they're doing any business. But the idea being that there's a bunch of people that aren't generating any business on their personal website at all. I mean, that we've got that side of it. Maybe it doesn't play anything at all. I kind of doubt it because I've seen enough of it in my own work and on the analytics side that it does draw traffic. That doing the hike and trails thing does draw traffic. The bigger question for me is more along the lines of does everyone need to do it, and who's the right crew to do it. Obviously, if an agent has a personal interest in hiking trails, then putting together that stuff makes sense because they're going to be able to do it well. But if they don't, if you're asking them to do stuff that they don't naturally do well, and there's no I don't think there's any amount of app buying that's going to make you a better curator of hiking trails. I don't know. I'm all around on this one. Matthew, what do you got?
I want to return to Rob's original point here, which is, the perceived level of service as a differentiator in the mind of the customer. How much of what the agent is providing as a valued service needs to be conducted by them? I think there's a case for and against in terms of, let's say who should be doing hiking trail blog posts and things like that. Like how much of it should actually be performed by the agent themselves, and who is actually growing their business doing that kind of stuff, and whether it leads to new business or repeat referrals and things like that. That's really the question here as it relates to the creativity aspect that we started with. Is I think we're all in agreement in terms of how you grow a business and how you actually use these things to differentiate, whether that's a shiny object or some kind of status conversation or whatever. But the thing that I wrestle with is how much should actually be done by the agent themselves as opposed to let's say outsourcing it. I think we're struggling with this idea of like, should it be done at all versus who does it. And I think it's a very, very interesting issue for real estate leadership in particular, in terms of these conversations happening inside of brokerages, and also to some extent, anybody that interacts with agents, whether that's an association or anybody that provides value to the agent community. Because I think because there's no customer data, there's a hell of a lot of assumption going on in terms of what we all should be doing, and I think that that's a kind of dangerous environment here for that type of conversation. Right. So, one of the things I would sort of caution with this stuff is, sure, everybody wants to be as aggressive as possible in differentiating themselves versus their local competition. But as we characterize that as an arms race, it actually becomes an issue of cost, yes, but it also has to be a fundamentally grounded in customer service. And Rob, I totally agree with you that an hour spent on the phone is important, but I think in the mind of the customer, not the agent, that hour spent perhaps producing a video on their behalf or marketing, creating something on their behalf, spending that time in the customer's mind is actually more important. It depends, what I wrestle with is who are we talking about when we're talking about the customer here?
Sure.
And the agent working as hard as possible to create and distribute things, to market the home. Remember, this is all about marketing the home, actually starts to become more the issue here, right?
So let's break that up into two pieces, because I don't disagree with that. In other words, if the intent is by leveraging this, high quality photography, leveraging, whatever apps, or leveraging video production crews or whatever it is you've got, the intent is to provide a higher level of service to an actual existing client, then I'm 100% agreed, right? The more you can do, the better off and the happier that your client will be. On the flip side, and I thought this is kind of where we're going with it, is the idea is that by having these things, you're going to get more business and, have it help in terms of bringing you more customers. That one I'm not so certain about, right? So if you divide it up in that way, I guess what I'm looking at it is, if it's actually about customer service delivery, and that requires that you go out and hire photographers and producers and do whatever, and hire an airplane to fly over the sky, at an NFL game, hey, you got to do what you got to do to make your client happy, right? I think that seems like very basic to me. But if the idea is that is the differentiator that's going to get you a client in the first place, I dispute that. I think what will get you the client in the first place is great word of mouth, great reputation, and referrals, first and foremost. I think that's sort of where I'm getting at. So that then leads immediately to kind of answering the first part of the question, which is who should do it. Well, somebody's got to do it, right? If you have an agent in your marketplace that is completely dominating, and every single luxury listing that this agent gets the full-blown treatment, and full-scale 30-minute video and the whole thing, well, you kind of have to do the same thing. And if that means that you personally can't do it, well, your broker ought to step up. If your broker can't do it, then then the market share will tilt the other way until something happens. So from that standpoint, I guess if I'm a broker, if I'm in the leadership, what I look at is what is the level of service being provided, across my marketplace, and where am I in terms of actual client service that's being delivered? Not worrying so much about is this going to bring me more lead gen or any of that? It's just what is the level of service that's being delivered? Am I on par with that? Am I ahead of it? Am I behind it? And I think you make the decisions that way. And then, of course, you have to have a conversation with the agent that you're providing the service to in terms of, well, if I'm paying for all this stuff, the split's not going to be 95-5, right? I mean, I got to make money to keep on doing this for you. So I think that conversation could and needs to happen. But that's how I look at it.
So here's I'm trying to sum up a little bit of where we're going and what I'm thinking on this a little bit is it possible to compete on creativity? Like, given that what we've said is that we're kind of in a commodity-like atmosphere where everyone's charging the same price for the same result. And the difference is in how we get to that result. Like if the result is a sold home or a bought home, and we're all charging the same price. So the question is there room to compete on creativity as your specific thing? And then if we were to go all the way back to Rob's idea of making a choice, right? So it's not just to compete. Do you want creativity? Yes. Do you want a free pony? Yes. If it's like, okay, the customer is sitting in the room and they can choose between one agent who's competing on creativity and another one who's competing on something else. And that's really the main question. After that, then we get into whose responsibility it is. And I think that's an easier one actually to tease out. The real issue in the lack of our no data in our lives on this one is, can we compete on creativity? What do you guys think, Rob?
I think for a real estate agent, the answer is no.
Yeah.
For a real estate agent, the answer is no, because, and just think about our lives, right? There are certain professions, certain people that we want creativity from, and then there are people that we really don't particularly care about that. Like, I don't care if my plumber is creative or not. I care that my plumber knows plumbing and can get it done quickly and as cheaply as possible. On the flip side, if I'm hiring somebody to be my, graphic designer for my website, then I care very much that person is creative. So, when it comes to real estate agents, I think it's almost like the question is, does the consumer expect the real estate agent to be creative? Are they a creative professional? Right now, my answer is no. I think, people look at real estate agents as sales professionals, as local advisors to some extent, as people who understand the whole real estate transaction, because God knows it's really confusing and a headache. And I think they expect the real estate agent to be sort of service professionals that'll call them when something is up, that will market their property for them, I suppose. But I don't think they're looking at the real estate agent as a creative professional. Not yet, anyway. That would be my answer.
Well, I think it also depends on how you define creativity. But to your point, your plumber isn't involved in the marketing of something for you. The plumber comes in and he does essentially a manual service that addresses a problem that you have in your home or one form or another. I think the equation between that kind of customer service and what an agent does is an unfair comparison. And I'm actually on the other side of this, Rob. I think there is the capacity to compete on creativity in terms of what you produce. Essentially, I think there's levels of creativity. Let's just say let's frame it as visual creativity as opposed to negotiation creativity or something like that. But on visual creativity, if an agent is able to produce better looking, harder working, more effective creative photography than someone else, that's competing on creativity. That they capture something that resonates in the mind of consumers and potential consumers, whether that's in a search engine or in a syndication portal or on their own website or wherever it gets distributed. I think that you actually can compete on creativity. And that's just photos, for example. I think competing on creativity is just being able to have the idea to produce something that resonates with the customer and resonates with the potential client in the buyer's mind as well. So I think that there are many opportunities to actually compete on creativity. Well, the issue that I have is that particular discussion is getting clouded by the race to the bottom of the web in terms of the availability and accessibility of the technology. I think that these things, Gaylord makes a really good point earlier on, that just throwing an Instagram filter on something does not a creative agent make. So in terms of creativity, we're actually talking about differentiated customer service in terms of what gets made. I think there's a difference between the customer service stuff and then the what gets made and distributed stuff. And I think maybe we're not there as we sort of start to reach the end of this argument, but I think that there are many opportunities to compete on creativity that unfortunately we don't have data behind, and in many ways we don't have enough industry examples behind as well. So that's sort of where I am on that, I think. Gaylord, what do you think?
I think this has been a pretty fascinating discussion for me because I kind of went into it assuming that there's a way to do it with creativity because I personally value that so much. But then I think we've covered a ton of ground. And what you've just outlined is definitely an example of, it's customer service either way. Perhaps one person's method of getting that result of a bought or sold house involves visual or, the traditionally considered creative activity, and maybe someone else's doesn't. And in that, if those two people were put next to each other, then the customer would have that choice thing that Rob brings up of, let's look at it. This person's going to do all this kind of creative work to sell my house, and this other person's going to do these other kinds of activities that are important to me as well, and then the consumer can decide. So it seems to me that, so I'm going to fall down on the side of, yes, it's possible to compete on creativity for organizations in which that is a core competency within the group. It doesn't mean that they have to produce it themselves, but they have to have the vision for it to put it together, I would say. But again, the thing that what we can definitely agree on, I suspect, is that buying an app doesn't make you creative. You're either creative or you're not, whether the app exists or not, because creativity is something that happens in the human mind, not in an app. And then And then in terms of whose responsibility it is, that would be like a whole another, hours worth of conversation. But the thing that we're really missing most of all is that customer data side of it. It would be fascinating to know, like, if we were to put together this either or kind of choice, how would the creativity side of it fare? And given that we just finished up a presidential election, I imagine there must be a ton of polling companies who are wondering where they're going to get their next meal from. So what we should do is figure out what would it cost, right? To call up Gallup and Rasmussen and PPP, call up all of Nate Silver's buddies, whatever, and say, listen, here's the question we want to ask people. Is if you were buying, like, I think we could put together the survey, right? So
if NAR is listening to this podcast, please understand that we are available to be hired to help you conduct this poll.
I don't think, and if they don't do it, we should at least figure out what would it cost to make that happen, because that would be a pretty valuable thing, and people would know off the bat. Agents could say, you know what, I saw the data from the surveys, and they said that we don't have to buy any more of these $1.99 apps because customers don't care. Or they discover that they do, and they have to figure it out from there. But anyway, that was just kind of my thought. It's been an awesome conversation with you guys. It's been definitely great to have Lindsay in the background telling us important points that we were missing. So even though we didn't hear her voice on the air today, she, definitely is a big part of this operation.
We are mere mouthpieces of the
pretty much.
Woman behind the curtain.
That's right. She's the brains of this unit. So anyway, thanks so much, you guys. This has been a lot of fun on the Trialogues podcast. Thanks, listeners. Peace out.
Bye-bye.
Take care.